Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk more about stories around the NFL, specifically now with the Chargers. They were one to watch with the tampering period coming down to the deadline before the new league year started. The story around the Chargers was their cap, them being over the cap, and I shouldn't say a bunch of players, really only four players taking up a majority of that cap space, specifically being Keenan Allen, Joey Bosa, Mike Williams, and Khalil Mack. They were taking up about half of their cap space, and specifically with Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, they were taking up They were gonna take a $36.6 million cap hit and $38.5 million cap hit in terms of how they were gonna affect the cap. 38.5 was gonna go from Khalil Mack, and the other from Joey Bosa. Something had to be done in this situation with the Chargers because of the league rules stating that on Wednesday, today at 4 p.m., that every team had to be under the $255 million cap limit. So everyone was expecting something to be done, specifically around those four players. Was someone going to get traded, cut? Something had to be done with them. In the end, it was Mike Williams who drew the shortest straw, and he was released by the team. He was coming off a very devastating knee injury this past season, so he didn't really get to show everything just this past season, which was unfortunate. But, the circumstances wrote the story itself. You would rather keep Keenan Allen. I was least worried that he was going to get cut or traded. Joey Bosa was another one that I thought it just felt like they didn't really want to keep him. It felt like they wanted him on their team. They wanted him to stick around because pass rushers, as everyone knows, don't just grow on trees. You don't just draft one in the first round every year, or you have the potential to draft one in the first round every year. Not to the level of Joey Bosa. He's shown flashes of being very good. So he was another one that I wasn't really convinced about. The two biggest ones for me were Mike Williams and Khalil Mack. I honestly thought it was going to be Khalil Mack. And before, I want to say 2:30 or 3 o'clock when the news dropped today, the segment was going to be who I thought they should cut. And I was going to make my argument for Joey Bosa or Khalil Mack. But that decision was made for me. It was Mike Williams and neither of Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa. But with that story coming out, there were still reports that, they saved $20 million in cap money. They were $27 million over the cap, but they saved that $20 million and only take $12.5 million in dead money instead of the 30 plus or $32 million, I think it was, for Mike Williams' contract. So that's positive. They got under the limit, but they just barely got under it. With the Chargers, they're trying to build something special there. They were fortunate enough to have their franchise quarterback already in Justin Herbert, and everyone is buying into Jim Harbaugh and the kind of program that he wants to run, the organization that he wants to run. He's riding a good train of success coming in. Obviously, he won the national championship with Michigan. So there's a lot of good things, positive vibes coming from Jim Harbaugh, and it gets a lot of people excited, but they have to be able to do something for Jim Harbaugh so he can get the players that he wants in to really start this rebuild going. And you hate to see, if you're a Chargers fan or if you're in the Chargers organization, you hate to see a guy like Mike Williams go because of his physical attributes, his skill set, and what he brought to the table. But compared to the rest of them, they weren't going to touch Keenan Allen. Just sentimental values there. He's a great receiver, very underrated. They were never going to touch him, so it was always going to be Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa. And news broke today as well that Khalil Mack agreed with the organization that they were going to restructure his deal to make it more cap-friendly for the Chargers, as well as agreeing that he was going to stay on the team if he restructured his deal. So that basically took Khalil Mack out of the equation as well. And I already said before, I got the sensation. I've read other reports that Joey Bosa was one that was in trade talks, but it never seemed as convincing as Mike Williams or Khalil Mack to get traded. And because all those were basically ruled out, they had no choice to go with Mike Williams. Now, he is a free agent. Other teams can negotiate with him. I'm sure he's going to draw a decent market for himself, but at the same time, he is coming off a rough injury, and his seasons have been pretty decent. He hasn't been like the A1 receiver on his team. The circumstances with Keenan Allen, a lot of receivers aren't gonna be that when lining up alongside Keenan Allen, but he's still attractive in a sense that people see his physical build, the speed, the skill set. It's still gonna be there, but I expect it to take a little bit longer because he's got to pass a physical eventually, and where is he in his recovery process and all that stuff. Coming off a knee injury, you don't want to rush that, especially if you're going to pay him a good amount of money. You don't want to rush it in any way, and it's a big gamble. But in saying that, I think he'll draw a good market. But there have been reports that the Chargers are open to bring him back. But then you have to think about it from his point of view. They're willing to take me back, but they already cut me because of the contract that I was on was too expensive for them. How much money am I going to get back from the Chargers if I sign there? All that has to be taken into consideration if you're Mike Williams. And where I wanted to take the story now that, the decision was already made, what was interesting about the decision and all the news that came out afterwards, Mike Williams is gone, they're under the cap, that's fine, but they're still looking to find other ways to get more cap space, and you could do that a variety of different ways. I haven't seen anything about them approaching Joey Bosa about renegotiating his deal, so you could go that route, but if you haven't mentioned it to him already, you might be thinking that he might not be open to do it. You've reached out to everybody else. I've seen things about Keenan Allen. Khalil Mack obviously has already done it. They've already approached him. With Mike Williams, they haven't approached him just because he seemed like the easiest one to cut. So no one's really approached Joey Bosa about a restructuring of a deal. So that's one way you could do it. It might not be the easiest way, but that's still an option. Another one is still the possibility of trading Bosa or Mack, or actually Bosa or Allen, I guess, in this aspect, because Mack already agreed to restructure his deal. So it seems like Khalil Mack is just going to stay on the team, and he was going to take that $38.5 million cap hit, like I said, but that's going to drop very much. It's going to drop significantly after they get all the details worked out, and once they do that, they'll have more room to make more moves. But this team, I think they're in a spot where they want to make some big acquisitions to this team because they have Justin Herbert, they have Joey Bosa if they keep him there. They have all this excitement with Jim Harbaugh coming in. On top of that, you're playing in LA, so just that market, that kind of criticism and attention that's always going to be surrounding the team is always going to be there, so you want to put out a good product to get the fans on your side, because it's already no secret that the Chargers fan base isn't one of the strongest. Now with Jim Harbaugh, you have a potential to get more people in, but they're not going to stick around very long if you don't put out a good product. Jim Harbaugh attracts people already in itself, but at the end of the day, it depends on what kind of football you're playing. The results matter probably more than anything as well. So all that just mixes into one solution of trying to lower this cap even more. And how do you do that? Well, that's where this discussion goes and where this question pops up of, do you still trade Joey Bosa or now potentially Keenan Allen? And to make an argument for either of them, I think Keenan has a stronger argument just because of money-wise. He's able to restructure his deal. He has been said to be open to it, but they haven't really gone any further than that. And with Joey Bosa, he is, like I mentioned, a great pass rusher. You don't just find them of his caliber every day or in every draft. But if you just look at it, with Joey Bosa, he's had to deal with a lot of injuries in his career, or very significant ones. He's 28 years old already, and over the past 2 years now, 2.5 years, he's only played in 14 games, over that same stretch of time that Khalil Mack has been on the team, and Khalil Mack hasn't missed any of his games that he's been available for, while Joey Bosa had to deal with a groin injury most recently, and since 2022, he's only managed to get 30 tackles, 9 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and he has spent all of his time here with the Chargers. He was drafted third overall, so to release that player and accept that you can't keep him is going to be hard for the Chargers. But at the same time, he does hold more value than I think Keenan does as well, which is another point where you might look at Bosa and just, shrug and say, what else are we supposed to do? For the greater of this team, we might have to sacrifice him to make the whole rest of the team better rather than just having one really good player at one position. You could upgrade the whole team a little bit more and maybe just be equal in terms of talent and level at different positions. I think he still garners some interest just because, like I mentioned, he's 28. He has had some success where he's managed to get a lot of sacks, but at the same time, injuries are there. He more recency bias is a real thing. He's not been to the top of his level, so that has to take into account. And then you think of what teams could afford him if he's not willing to restructure his deal or take less money. There's a lot of teams out there with a lot of money. I've seen the 49ers be rumored with him. Maybe they could lure him in because his brother's on there, and that could make him take less money. But, I'm not really too hopeful on them because the Niners still have to figure out a bunch of other stuff like the contract with Brandon Ayuk and fixing and plugging in some holes where some players have already departed. So that's another thing they have to worry about. Another team could be like the Commanders. They still have a lot of money left over. I know they've spent a lot, but they were able to gain a lot of money and cap space. I'm pretty sure they had the most in the NFL. So that's another option, as well as potentially the Las Vegas Raiders could be one. They paid Christian Wilkins, so they could be set already there if they want to look elsewhere. But to have a chance of pairing up Wilkins, Max Crosby, and Joey Bosa, I think would be intriguing. Within the division, I was going to say it's less likely to happen, but the way things have been going this free agency period, it looks like it's more likely to happen. So that's another one. Those are a few options to go with if and only if the Chargers decide to trade him. That's still the biggest question. They have some room to do some stuff now, but like I mentioned before, they have a lot of pressure on them, really, because of all the attention they're bringing in with Jim Harbaugh, with people finally thinking this could be a year where Justin Herbert can really reach his max potential with a good, experienced coach in the NFL that has had success with the 49ers in the past. He returns now to the Los Angeles Chargers where he played before. All that is just very sentimental, very fairy tale-esque. So you have to do something to capitalize on all the attention you're getting right now to develop into some sort of success. But at the same time, we have to just wait and see. There's moves happening every day. Probably every day this week, there's going to be more and more news coming out. So I wouldn't be surprised if something happened this week, but at the same time, this could drag on for a little bit just because it has to do with money and financial situations. But I'll leave that topic there for now. I'm sure I'll retouch on it later on. I will transition now into the second break of this show. And when I come back on the other side, I'm going to talk about the AFC North. I'm going to break down the Cleveland Browns, Steelers, Bengals, and Ravens, all the moves they made, and which teams I really like and what teams it could have affected the most heading into next season, as well as the discussion on the Washington Commanders and how they've improved a lot, and they could be the biggest winner in this free agency period thus far. So don't go anywhere. More to come on those stories up next.